Welcome in to another episode of the Crimson Crossover Podcast. I'm Charles Branch, joined by Joey Blackwell and Michael Harper. Christian Sykes has an undisclosed injury and will be out from tonight's podcast, but we continue to roll on just like this Alabama basketball team. It was an unfortunate Sunday for Alabama basketball, as Alabama basketball was again Gator bait for Todd Golden and the Florida Gators, losing 100 to 77 on primetime ABC TV. Makes five straight against the Florida Gators. None of them have really been close. I think it's very frustrating for Alabama fans. I know some headlines that said Alabama got dominated by Florida. Joey, dominated actually seems like a light out adjective to what happened on Sunday. So I'm going to send it over to you. How would you better describe Sunday and your assessment of the game between Alabama and Florida?
I think dominate is a good compromise because yeah, I agree with you in that my words would be a lot worse than that. um, but no, we were talking before the podcast. Any night or any day, any game where you lose the turnover battle 18-2 and then lose the sorry, mine's going crazy. When you lose 18-2 turnover battle and then you don't convert either of those two turnovers, you force into points while Florida converted 25, and then you also lose the rebound battle pretty heavily. You're not going to get a win ever. I don't care who you're playing. And just overall, just really a just an abysmal performance. Really, I credit to Florida. I think they came. Obviously, they came ready to play, and so Alabama's lack of performance is nothing to do with Florida in that regard. I think Florida played a near perfect basketball game, but the matchup, Alabama never really. Alabama does not stack up well against this Florida team. They have a lot of length. They have a lot of experience. Um, and so I say experience as we have a former pro on our team. Um, but just sorry, that still hasn't quite settled into my brain yet. This being my first pod back since Bediako's played a game. Um, but just overall, not the best night shooting. Florida dominated the paint. I think, if I'm not mistaken, 72 points on the night were in the paint. They had a very well-rounded performance from their starting five, other than Lee. I think Lee finished with only 6 points, but everybody else, performed really well, had double digits. So Florida came to play, Alabama didn't. Hopefully, we'll be able to turn this thing around, but we have a very tough opponent in Texas A&M this midweek. I would say a probably underrated team in Texas A&M. And then, of course, Auburn, regardless of how good or bad they are, that's always a tough game, and especially being played in Auburn Arena. So I'll pass it on to Michael. That's my sky high just viewpoint of this game. There's some games where you just need to burn the tape and move on. And I think this might have been one of those games. What do you think, Michael?
Well, I think that's a good transition because, Michael, I want your assessment, but I do also want to hear from you as a coach. How do you flush a game like this with your team after you have a lackluster performance in a primetime spot?
I think it just depends on the situation. So, I mean, there's been times I've been a part of as a player and a coach where you just burn the tape and move on and say we're not going to focus on this. I think yesterday's one you got to watch. Like you got to make your guys sit down and say, "Hey, we're going to watch this, and you're going to
Pry their eyes open.
yes, yeah, you're gonna see this film. Like you're gonna see how you got bullied in the paint. You're gonna see some of the lazy passes that were made yesterday. You're gonna see some of the just nonsensical turnovers that were made. So I think it's not as I think it's one that you've got to show. But I also think it's one that you have to show it and then you got to flush it quick, right? You can't just harp on it. You can't say, okay, man, we played like crap yesterday, and we're gonna kind of mope around and not get ready to play an important game on Wednesday. Um, which has already happened to this Alabama team, in my opinion. I really feel like that there. So there's an old saying that says, "Don't let one team beat you twice." And I really felt like and this may be a little bit unfair to Texas, but I really felt like that Alabama let Vanderbilt beat them twice. You lose a disappointing game to Vanderbilt, and then you turn around and you have a lackluster performance against Texas. Not to take away from Texas, because they had a good game plan going into the game. They shot the ball well, played really good defense. So I'm not trying to take away from them, because they're also very well coached. But you have to go in with the mindset of, hey guys, we're going to show you this because we're going to see that, hey, we can't let this happen again. And without trying to just state the obvious, is, I mean, we got to fix this, because now we're going to have teams that are just going to try to pound everything inside. And not every team has three bigs like Florida has, really four. But you're still going to have some, teams that are just going to say, hey, we are going to continue to try to get physical with you. So you definitely, you move on, but you watch it first, then you watch it, then you burn it and move on.
So 72 points in the paint, as we've talked about. Some of those probably attributing to more points at the free throw line, of course, with and one opportunities or just getting fouled in the paint, which the 72 points in the paint is ridiculous, but I think we can all agree is still an anomaly. The 18 turnovers is also an anomaly for this team. So, Joey, I want to start with you. Of those two, the points in the paint and the turnovers, did either one of those give you cause for concern going forward, or is one of them concerning that it might become something that becomes repetitive, like we've seen with our issues in rebounding the basketball this year?
If I had to pick one, even though the number's a lot less intimidating, I'd pick the turnovers. I think, like you just said, I think the 72 points in the paint kind of serves as an anomaly. We haven't really seen that. I don't expect to see a number that high again this year. And if we do, then we'll bring this conversation back to the table. Turnovers, I think the first part of the season, Bama did a pretty good job of limiting teams to less than double-digit turnovers, but we've kind of started to see it rear its ugly head again, particularly against, we were talking about coming off of losses. We see, sloppy ball handling, that kind of stuff. I didn't expect to see quite this bad, especially coming off of that big win against Missouri. But turnovers to me are just a lot more. It's a problem that can remain more consistent than being dominated in the paint like that. We also talked about Florida has great length. They're kind of built to be able to dominate Alabama in the paint. So I don't think we're going to see a team really like that in SEC play, at least that caliber. So overall, I would have to believe that turnovers would be a more concerning thing. That being said, like I said, it wasn't really an issue, I think, in the first third of the season. So hopefully they can still rectify that. Another bright side to Alabama, at least moving forward, is you're not going to have teams get 25 points off of turnovers every night either. Florida, like I said at the top of this podcast, Florida played a near perfect basketball game. They were able to capitalize on every single mistake Alabama made, which was a lot of them. And so hopefully, like Michael just talked about, they can watch this tape, learn from it, move on past it, flush it out of their minds and move on past it. But they can also use it as a learning opportunity moving forward.
So one thing that, Florida did too, their defensive game plan was great, with forcing turnovers, and it wasn't anything new. Like that's the thing, is it wasn't just some, hey, Todd Golden just, way out X's and O's, Nate Oates. It was more about a mentality that, hey, we're going to go in and dominate them physically. And then when we do that, they're going to back away. And, those 25, 28 points off turnovers, is that what you said? 25 points?
25 points.
Those are typically points in the paint. right? Most of them are points in the paint. They may have hit a three or got, an and one. I think they, to hit a free throw. But I mean, that's part of the points in the paint too, is runouts and run out dunks and from the live ball turnovers. And so they're going back to their defensive game plan. Sorry, I'm all over the place because there's so many things that just went wrong. But with the turnovers, part of what they did was switched 1 through 5. Not a lot of teams that can switch 1 through 5, that can switch ball screens 1 through 5, that are athletic enough to switch 1 through 5 and let their big guard LeBaron Philon, right? But we saw Chinyelu able to do that. Now, I do think the play at the end of the half that he's getting a lot of credit for, I thought there could have been 3 different fouls called, but they didn't. We've got to try harder to get downhill and, make that contact called, get called, excuse me. Sometimes you got to force the contact to get called, right? Whether it's almost borderline, get called for a charge, right? If you're frustrated with that, instead of kind of backing away, which is what I felt like we did too often, and which is what Nate Oates said. And I agreed with that. But as far as their defensive game plan, they said, hey, we're not going to help off shooters. We're going to switch 1 through 5. We're going to put some ball pressure, on you. We're going to move our feet, and we're not going to let shooters beat us. Now, with that said, if you would have told me before the game that we were going to shoot 42% from 3-point range, I would have told you this game was coming down to the wire. But the problem is, when you have 18 turnovers, that's 18 possessions that you don't get a shot up, right? So, and that's you're likely going to, score at least on 10 of those, or at least on 9. Let's just say you score on half of those, right? And so you can do the math, whether it's a 2 or a 3. When you don't get shots up, you're not going to win games. And Alabama's not a team defensively that's going to force a lot of turnovers to get those possessions back, right? So to me, all the attention is going into the mismatch of Chinyelu, Condon, Hawk, and rightfully so to an extent. The difference is the turnovers, and losing 18 possessions, right? You're losing 18 possessions. That's an insane amount of possessions for a really good offensive team. So,
yeah, you lose 18 possessions, and Florida only loses 2. So you're minus 16 in the turnover battle with 2 offenses that are highly ranked in KenPom ratings. That's where I was going to go to next is Alabama. Of the 7 losses, 5 of them have been to teams that are in the top 20 in KenPom on offense. Alabama is 1-5 against teams that have a top 20 KenPom offense. Ironically, the one win is against Illinois, who's considered the best offense in the country. If I expand that even further to the top 30, the record goes to 3-6. You include Gonzaga in there. So the one loss that's not in there is Tennessee, who obviously has a very good defense. And as we know, not making excuses, but Alabama played that game with very few guards. You had no Amari Allen, you had no Aiden Holloway, and really limited on Alabama's ability to be successful on offense as being the number 3 best offense in the country. We've seen growth at times from the defense. It's not like it was 2 years ago where this team is up in the 90s, 100s as far as their defensive rating. This team, it's interesting enough, their rating's 103, which is similar to 2 years ago, but they're around that mid-60 range, and before this game, they were 59. If Charles Bediako is still playing for Alabama, I expect that to improve further, but I do want to hear from y'all, and I'll let Michael go first. Do you see improvement in this defense? Do you feel like there's opportunities for this defense to continue to improve? Or is this just going to be an issue that when we play really good offenses that we're not going to be able to have that edge that we typically have on the offensive side of maybe running away from teams with 3-pointers and just from a scoring perspective.
I, I think it's on a matchup. I think it's a matchup basis. I do. I think it's on a game. I mean, it's a game to game type deal. You mentioned Tennessee. Yeah, we talk all the time. Tennessee and Florida are kind of the kryptonite for a natives coach team, right? Um, Tennessee, though, the Tennessee game this year, I felt like, was a completely different issue. It was Nate Ament scoring 29 points or whatever. I think he had 29. And that was a product of us not having anyone that could guard him because the guys that would guard him were out, with injury. I do think so. I think there's been some improvement um, in effort on the defensive end. I do. I still think there's a little bit of the guards have to do a better job of staying in front of the ball. And to be honest, just with my personal opinion, it's just, I don't know that we necessarily have the guards to be just regular, really good, solid defenders. I would almost rather our guards learn to be what you would call a menace and just, try to do what LeBaron Philon's done a lot this year and just, pick the pocket of the guard. And so I would like to see us do that. I feel like we're better defensively when our guards extend out a little bit and force the ball screen to come a little higher instead of the ball screen starting right at the top of the key, which was what was happening yesterday. Because our ball screen defense is still not great, and it has nothing to do with what we're in. Our ball screen defense when we hedge is not all that great either, and our ball screen defense when we hedge turns into rebounding struggles. So it's kind of a two-edged sword. So we look better when we hedge defensively or when we change up pick and roll coverages. But then we struggle to get rebounds on the defensive end because we're in a scramble situation. When we are playing drop coverage, which I feel like you kind of had to yesterday, you're not, I don't think necessarily doing anything else would have been a great idea. I could be wrong, but just my opinion. But so I think there is definitely room for improvement, and I see some improvement. It's just not enough, to be quite honest with you. And that's what's going to continue to be preached, and that's what that's what this team has to do going forward if they're going to do anything beyond just being just making it to the second weekend. If they want to do anything beyond just make it to the second weekend. Now, if you're going to be happy with just making it to the second weekend, then this team can continue to honestly do what they do, because I still think this team's a second weekend team regardless, because I think you're going to win the first round game most likely. And as long as you win the first round game, it's really hard to turn around and defend this style on a day's scout. So anyway, I've said a lot to say, yes, I see some improvement, but there's still not enough.
Joey, I think the number is of the past 2025 national champions that they've had an offensive rating in KenPom of better than top 25, and I believe the defensive number is top 40. So again, after the Florida game, Alabama's at 65. Do you think there's any chance with this Alabama team, and we all would recognize whether Charles Bediako is on this team or not is going to be a huge piece of that. Do you have any faith that Alabama's got the players to play defense to maybe crack that top 40 before the season ends, the regular season ends?
Top 40, absolutely. I think they can really turn things around. At the end of the day, I mean, they're 66 out of what 365 teams, right, in KenPom. So it's not like they're 354th. They still have a really solid defense. Um, Looking at their schedule, like I talked earlier, they do have a couple of tough games coming up this week. It's the SEC though; it really doesn't ever really let up. But after that, you do have a stretch of Ole Miss, South Carolina, and well, a tough Arkansas team. Um, but you have some fairly winnable games to where your defense can flex its muscles a little bit. Um, so overall, I'm not too concerned. I think that this team still has a lot of winnable games, and with winnable games comes the opportunity for solid defensive performances. Will they, gun to my head, will they crack the top 40? I'd honestly probably lean not, but I think they can definitely get between 40 and 50. I think there's plenty of opportunities there. That being said, regardless of that, I completely agree with Michael. I think this is still absolutely a second weekend team, regardless of where their defense is ranked in KenPom. I think this team has really hung its hat on its offense so far this season. Um, but I think that there's still plenty of defensive capabilities on this team. They just need to learn how to, if Bediako stays in particular, they need to learn how to gel better. They need to all get on the same page better, because that is a huge part of defense. And in games where they've done very well, we have seen that. We've seen them play with really good cohesion. And unfortunately, in games where like we saw this past weekend, there wasn't a lot of cohesiveness or a lot of communication. We've seen it kind of fall apart. So hopefully, as that dynamic potentially improves, we'll be able to see that. And you know, I think the team can do it, but it's gonna take a lot.
Well, before we transition to Texas A&M, I know we were talking a little bit before we started just about some of the comments that were made on Charles Bediako during the game. And while we have the opportunity to talk about him, hopefully we continue to have opportunities to talk about him the rest of the year. I did want to give everybody an opportunity just in the past week. We've all seen the media reports, the media outrage, and just to give your own opinion as far as how ridiculous it's been. And I don't mind starting because I know Dick Vitale was talking about that, where these are NCAA member institutions that all should abide by the NCAA rules. Well, the NCAA rule book has been blown to bits for the past decade. And I know Dick's not had been involved as he would have been 20 years ago, so he probably has forgotten a lot of that. And I also would say about Dick Vitale, like, look, I understand he's a big icon for college basketball. If Mike Krzyzewski was doing this at Duke, he'd call Mike Krzyzewski the greatest trailblazer in college basketball. He doesn't like Nate Oates. He felt that Alabama should have canceled the season with the whole Brandon Miller situation. It's past Dick Vitale. Everybody can love him for what he was previously, kind of like it passed Lee Corso at a time. It's time to move on from Dick Vitale. Now, I did hear Jimmy Dykes talking about this situation. I know he had our game on Sunday, but he also talked about it Tuesday night as he had the Kentucky Vanderbilt game. And I'll give him at least some credit. At least during that broadcast, he openly said he didn't blame Nate Oates and he didn't blame Charles Bediako. He did think that this was going to be a big deal for the NCAA and something that the NCAA needed, whether getting Congress involved, which I don't really like. You're having one corrupt organization bail out another corrupt organization. That just doesn't seem to make sense. But I do think it will create change, and I think it will create change that maybe the power conferences do break away and have their own set of rules and get back to that college sports should be for amateurs. Not that they shouldn't still get paid. I think that's here to stay from now on, but that you have more rules and regulations of that you don't have 27-year-olds playing college athletics, even if they do something like go into the minor leagues in baseball and then coming back. That there needs to be some type of structure around that. But I wanted to talk about it because, as y'all probably just saw, I got that off my chest as far as how I felt about Dick Vitale's comments. But Joey, if you got any comments, the floor is yours.
Let me start with I love Dick Vitale. I think he's been a cornerstone of the college basketball institution, at least as far as media is concerned, for a good bit here. But yeah, everybody's entitled to their own opinion, but it was with the at length that he went with it and talked about it over and over and over again. That wasn't the story. I mean, it was a story of the game, no doubt. I think he would have been a bad commentator if he hadn't talked about it at least at some point during the game. But it was really just how frequently it was brought up. It was like Alabama football being mentioned on an SEC men's basketball broadcast. With how frequently it was, and um, that wasn't my core aggravation. Though. My core aggravation stemmed from really the media outrage, and what I mean by that is you had the official ESPN account broadcast, posting on social media the G League dropout chant from Florida, and you had a lot of different high profile accounts tweeting that kind of stuff out. And it's like, well, you've revealed how you feel about this situation. And I know some people, fans of other schools, probably like, oh, well, they're just reporting what happened. It's like, no, you're pushing an agenda. And so that was my whole aggravation was I feel like the media really isn't treating this like there's two sides to this story. I, in full transparency, I think that Bediako playing for Alabama is ridiculous. Not from a perspective of he shouldn't be playing for Alabama, because I think that the rules that are currently in place that allow that are ridiculous. And I think that this could potentially go a long way to, like you were saying, Charles, to hopefully have the NCAA to create those bumpers, those rules that need to be in place. That being said, like Todd Golden said, I don't fault Nate Oates or Charles Bediako for taking advantage of the rules that are in place. As it is right now, Alabama currently isn't doing anything wrong. So we need to stop. The court of public opinion needs to stop treating them like they've already, it's like you said with the Brandon Miller situation. We need to stop jumping to conclusions and just saying, oh, they're doing something wrong when the court has ruled otherwise. And I know that's a whole other can of worms to open with that, but that was my core frustration is I feel like both sides aren't being presented. I feel like when other players, like Najee for Baylor, I feel like when that kind of came out, there was a little bit of outrage, but first off, the media moved past it really quickly. And then on top of that, I feel like both sides were more equally represented in that. And it was more of a general discussion of the NCAA and its rules and how that probably needs to be changed. Whereas with this, I feel like it's just all outrage. And instead of that outrage being directed to NCAA and its issues that have pervaded forever, but more specifically the past 10 years, that rage just instead been aimed at Alabama specifically. And so, I mean, we're Alabama fans, we're used to it. But it comes with the territory of being a successful athletics program. But at the same time, it doesn't mean it can't rub you the wrong way from time to time.
Michael, before you go, I want to tee you up a little bit because the last time we talked, like you're a high school coach. You're for high school athletes. So I think you're a perfect person to talk about this. And one thing that I thought about this week is I understand what red shirts are for. I understood what the COVID rule was, 6 years ago, trying to give people an opportunity to come back and play because their season got taken away from them. But one thing we do know is if you get injured your senior year in high school, you're done. You're not getting a red shirt or anything like that. Sometimes life just happens. So, with that being said, I want to hear from you as far as your perspective from the high school side, but also just your opinions as far
Right.
as the media outrage and all that.
Well, first thing before we get into that, like it's just to me what's funny is that people hate Alabama athletics so much that they're actually now sticking up for the NCAA. Like I find that hilarious that it's constant NCAA bashing. The system needs to change. They've got to fix something. They have no idea what they're doing. It's just such a corrupt organization. Oh, but the NCAA set rules now that so Alabama needs to abide by those. In I'll say this before I go into the high school athletes, but to me, there's no difference in Najee playing for Baylor than there is Charles Bediako playing for Alabama. And I know our rival fans like to bring up disingenuously, might I add, that Charles Bediako already played for Alabama. He had his chance. He had his chance to play. Chose that, and this is the wording they use, that he chose to forego his eligibility. Well, the moment that you enter the draft and remain in the draft and get drafted, you are also foregoing your eligibility. So by that, just that simple thing, Najee forewent his eligibility. So I think that's the right way to say it.
I'm confused. So I'm literally typing in was the past tense of forego.
So the
forewent, you got it. That's it.
forewent.
Forewent
All
is the
right.
proper word.
My former English teacher mother would be proud. So to me, it's very disingenuous, the argument that people are using, because it's the same thing. There's no difference, regardless of he played 2 years, left, then decided to come back. He played in the G League. So did Najee. So did there. We have other we have European, like we've talked about that. There's no reason to keep rehashing that. I understand the difference between somebody that's 17 years old that's coming, to college to play. But when you've been in the professional league till you're 21, 22, 23 years old in Europe, you're playing professional basketball. You're not playing your 18 and under, basketball that they have in there. So that's just my 2 cents on that situation. The other situation is, again, I don't like to be overcritically of people. I really don't. I don't like to be overcritically of people because I like to put myself in those situations. I'm not great on this podcast. I know. I understand. I'm just here to give a little bit of perspective, and it's something that I enjoyed, doing. But I will say yesterday's broadcast was embarrassing. Just from someone that, if I was pulling up wanting to watch the game and I was not an Alabama fan or not a Florida fan and I was just wanting to watch the game, from the very beginning of the broadcast until the buzzer, they did not stop talking about the Charles Bediako situation. And I understand that you have to address it. You do. You have to address it. They talked about it in the pregame. When he makes a play or he makes a bad play, he misses a shot. I understand you can make a comment here or there, but Florida's running half court offense and they're still talking about it. There was a time it was a tie game. The game was in the 20s in the first half. It's a tie game and they're still talking about it. In my opinion, yesterday was a 2.5 hour ESPN talk show. It was an extended first take segment or an extended college game day segment rather than the actual broadcast. And yes, Carl Ravitz, Jimmy Dykes, Dick Vitale are way better at doing what I'm doing right now. 100%. But that's just, in my opinion, that was not what yesterday should have been about. What yesterday should have been about was two teams playing really well. And I actually thought it was a little bit of a disservice to Florida and Todd Golden because of how they played. So there's my rant. I can, take whatever, there, but that's my opinion. First time I've ever gone on a rant like that on this podcast. And, but so now to your original question, and I'll keep this short, but I'm always going to be in favor of the high school athletes, always. And I'm not a fan of the way the transfer portal works. That's taken away opportunities from high school players. Just some, school, where I am at currently, and the school I'm going to, that I'm leaving one school and going to another one. You know, you're having schools come in and talk to kids, but what we're seeing is, before, when you're recruiting juniors, when you're recruiting juniors heavily, well, now you're having to wait until they're seniors, and you're having to, not every program is an SEC program. Not every kid is an SEC type kid. Not every kid is a Big 12, ACC. Not every kid's a Division I athlete. Well, what happens is that trickles down, right? And so the kids that were normally getting, division, maybe a lower level Division I mid-major, or Division II, Division III, now they're, getting NAI offers, or they're just not getting any offers. Part of that is because of, one, they're waiting to see what happens in the portal, right, before they can, do that. And they're waiting to see what they have to pay, some of these portal guys in NIL. So they have to wait to offer a lot of our kids. And to be quite honest, we can't even get some schools to come and see, and they're not even really interested in taking too many high school kids. Well, since that's happening, it all trickles down. So whereas a player that might have been a Division III player is not, because that Division III player is getting the kid that should have been a Division II player. So all of this is a trickle down effect. So yes, I'm not a fan of the way this is happening, and hopefully one of the reasons I'm kind of glad that this has happened with Charles Bediako. Obviously, the first reason is because I think it makes, Alabama basketball better, right? But the second reason is, hopefully it brings some change. And, sometimes, as we've seen in every aspect of life, sometimes it takes something dramatic to happen to bring about change. And so maybe this will bring about change.
Last thing before we get into A&M, Nate Oates made this comment. There's a little bit of a snipe shot at Nick Pringle. I don't think he meant it negatively, but I did think it was really interesting. The last team that Bediako was on, he was a sophomore. Nick Pringle was a junior, and Nick Pringle is still playing basketball 3 years after that. It just shows how messed up the rules have gotten, how eligibility has gotten, and clearly that has got to be reined in, not only from how many years that you have of eligibility, but who can actually be eligible.
It's time for 5 for 5. I really agree. It's time for 5 years to play five, and I think that needs to be the end of it. And I agree with you. We've talked about that before. The 5 for 5 has to happen. There can't be 6 year, 7th year, whatever.
Yeah. So getting into Texas A&M, the leader right now in the SEC as far as the standings. Joey, I think you mentioned it before. A little bit of an under the radar team, maybe you're an underappreciated team. They are one spot out of the top 25. They are 26, and I think Alabama is 27. So it'll be 26 versus 27, a nice battle on Wednesday night. You would have thought the headlines would have been Rylan Griffin's return to Tuscaloosa, but no, it's Mountain Brook product Bucky McMillan at Texas A&M in his first year, bringing his Aggies into Tuscaloosa. He's already gotten the one win down at Auburn. Auburn fans would say it was controversial, but the clock clearly expired before the shot got off. It's unfortunate that this game, in my opinion, is a 6 o'clock game. We know that crowds sometimes are a little bit late arriving for these 6 o'clock games, but I do think it's a high-profile game, not just because it's two teams continuing to compete for the SEC regular season and what Texas A&M has done. But of course, there is some animosity from Alabama fans towards Bucky McMillan for some things that happened in the past. So, Joey, I'll kick it to you first. Just what do you think going into this game? What do you think about Texas A&M, and what are you hoping to see Alabama do as they bounce back from this loss to Florida?
Well, like I said at the very beginning, I think this is a very underrated Texas A&M team. Like you said, they're top of the conference right now, but they're not ranked. Technically, they're not ranked in the top 25. 17-4 overall. They have some pretty solid wins under the belt, 7-1 in conference play so far. It's a lot better than Alabama can say at this moment in time. They have some pretty solid SEC wins as well. Overall, I think all 5 of their starters, I believe, are averaging double-digit points. I think they're led by, of course, senior forward Rashawn Agee, who has 13.9 points a game and also a remarkable 9 rebounds a game, as well as 2.3 assists. He's of course, a senior forward. He's 6'7". This team has some pretty solid length to their guards. That I know they have Ruben Dominguez, 6'6", Marcus Sills, 6'4", Rylan Griffin, of course, who we all know, 6'5". Pop Isaacs, of course, while he's on the shorter side at 6'2", he's given Alabama some troubles in the past. So overall, I think this is a really, like I said, underrated team. It's been very interesting, and as a neutral basketball fan, it's been very fun to watch how Buckyball has kind of invaded Texas A&M and really seen how it's developed there, and it has been obviously remarkably successful. They're at the top of the standings right now, so it's not going to be an easy game for Alabama. This will be one of the toughest home games I think they've played so far this season. Especially A&M they have a fire lit under them right now. And I wanted to get into this earlier, but I didn't quite. Alabama has at least under Nate Oates has done a really good job of painting a target on their back, especially even when they're not at the top of the conference. And I think with Betty Yako coming in, they kind of have once again put a target on their back. Teams are looking to play Alabama. Not that Alabama would sneak up on anybody in general, but now I think other teams coming in to play them have a chip on their shoulder. And I think that there's no doubt that Bucky has always been a really good motivator. And I think he's going to definitely have some ammunition to play Alabama, especially coming back after coaching at Stanford for a while. Now this whole Betty Yako situation. So this is going to be a really tough game. I agree with you. I think it's unfortunate. It's a midweek game. It's really unfortunate. It's a 6 p.m. tip because it doesn't matter who Alabama's playing. That's going to be a slow crowd getting there from Birmingham. But overall, it should be very fun to watch these two coaches go head to head. We've been wanting to see it for a while. And so now we're finally getting to see it with two really solid SEC teams.
Michael, Texas A&M is going to play fast. Coach McMillan, I can't remember what game it was. Oh, it was against Mississippi State. Talked about how they played mother-in-law defense. So they are going to be on you from start to finish. We obviously like to play fast, but also have in the back of my mind, as far as our team has been very banged up this year, and you got guys playing through a bunch of injuries. Do you have any concerns about our ability to hold up, not just from the tempo, but from how physical a game like this could be and how scrappy A&M does play?
I don't think I really don't. And I'm going to, maybe stick my neck out here on this one, but I just, Texas A&M is playing great basketball. They should be ranked in the top 25. Kind of shows you how pointless the top 25 is in basketball. Like the AP and the coaches poll are ridiculous at this point. They mean nothing. But I'm not as concerned because Texas A&M's team gives Alabama more of an opportunity to play 4 guards or 3 guards, a forward and 1 big. So you can rotate Bediako and Aiden Sherrill, and you don't have to play them together consistently. You'll see more lineups of Fallon, Holloway, Reitzel, Allen, and either Sherrill or Bediako. And then you'll throw in some Houston Millette, some London Jemison there too. You will probably still see both bigs on the floor at times, but I don't think you'll see it a lot. Now I could be wrong, but I just based on Texas A&M's makeup, I don't think you'll see it, and also because of their style of play, because you're going to want as many ball handlers on the floor as you can. With that said, I think the quickness of Alabama's guards are going to be too much for Texas A&M's pressure. Okay. Yes, it can be very annoying. That style of play is, I actually like that style of play. I like Texas A&M's style of play. And you don't see it a lot anymore. You saw it a lot more when I was growing up and going through it. My high school team played that way. That's how we played. And so that's how I used to play. So I got used to it. Um, but I think that you will have, we're going to have the ability to not just break the press, but I think you're going to see us score off of the press. I really hope, and this is what I hope happens, and this is what I think is going to happen. We'll attack the press to score and not just attack the press to break the press. Because to be quite honest, if we don't have to get into half court offense, that's better for us. So I'm not as concerned about us holding up physically because I think that one, it's going to be a different type of physicality. It's not going to be like where Florida really got up in you or Tennessee really gets up in you and is very handsy to stop your penetration. Now, A&M's a little more handsy because they're trying to force steals. And this may sound dumb considering we're coming off a game where we just had 18 turnovers. But it's a totally different situation in my opinion. So no, I actually like this matchup for Alabama. And I expect to win the game. I don't know what the spread is, but I expect Alabama. This is one I expect Alabama to cover quite easily.
Uh, it should be a fun night. I expect there to be a lot of energy once people are able to get in their seats for this game on Wednesday night, 6 o'clock Central Time. We typically do talk about the weekend game, but that's going to be Auburn, and we're also supposed to get some news before the Auburn game. So we're going to wrap up this episode of Crimson Crossover right now. We will have another episode coming out later this week to talk about the first time of Nate Oates versus Stephen Pearl in the Iron Bowl of basketball, or whatever you want to call it. We are into February now. Weekly Joe is really kicking off. They had a great interview with Rob Vaughn. If you haven't listened to it, highly recommend going and listening to that podcast. And of course, on the basketball side, we also have the Blue Collar podcast with Michael Southern and Emily Smar. So still in the thick of it as far as basketball season. We will continue to be having our podcasts. Like I said, we'll have another episode coming out later this week to talk about Auburn. And then, of course, we'll have another episode the following week as we continue to roll along in this SEC schedule. Guys, did I forget anything? Anybody got any final comments? I think we're all good.
Nope.
So with that, we will sign off. And as always, roll tide.
Roll Tide.
Roll Tide.